Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. Today we're going to be talking about some historical fiction recommendations that do not take place during World War II. I did a video like this as a shelf spotlight 3 years ago where I talked about 10 non-World War II historical fiction recommendations, and I've read a lot more since then, and I just felt like it was time to do it again. So I have a stack of 11 because there are 2 from the same author, so I'm including them kind of together, making my own rules, but then I have 4 middle grade, maybe honorable mentions. I also think these are fantastic, but I have 11 adult novels. I'll get to them in a second. Let's quick run through 4 middle grade historical fiction that are not set during World War II. So the first one I have is The Night Diary by Veera Hiranandani. This one takes place in India and Pakistan when they separate into India and Pakistan. The countries separate in large part because of religious reasons, or the way the line is drawn is because of religious reasons. So Hindi people go on one side and Muslims are on the other, but there is a family who is on the wrong side of the divide, and there is a revolution and it's very dangerous and they have to try to get to the other side. It's very intense. It's written in journal entries. It's 1947, so it's just after the war, or like towards the end of the war, but it has really nothing to do with World War II, except that this is a conflict that was happening around that same time. India is newly freed from British rule and it's political upheaval. Very interesting, very intense at times, but also heart-wrenching and heartwarming as well, as we follow this young girl as tensions between Muslims and Hindus rise. Okay. One that I just recently read and absolutely loved was Everything Else in the Universe by Tracy Holzer. I think I've raved about this quite a bit in my Read Like Amanda vlog that I did. She's the one that told me about this book, Amanda from The Curly Reader, and she was not wrong. It's fantastic. And this book takes place during the Vietnam War, like kind of right in the midst of the war. We follow Lucy and Milo, both who have parents affected by the war. Lucy's dad has just returned and he's not the same as when he left. Just things are very different and she wants things to go back to how they were. But I think this book does a really good job of exploring all of the tensions that were in place during that time. People who really were against the war and soldiers, and then soldiers coming back with PTSD and not being treated well at all. And just all of the different highly emotional things that people were thinking about during this time are portrayed in here really, really well. How it affected families and veterans and just communities as a whole. I thought this was a fabulous read. There was some beautiful writing in here as well. Don't pass up that one. I'm going to include Refugee by Alan Gratz, even though there is one storyline of the 3 that is World War II. But in this one, we follow 3 different kids. One is a Jewish boy living in Germany in the 1930s, has to escape. One storyline is from Cuba in 1994, and she has to escape. And then Mahmoud's storyline is a Syrian boy in 2015. Just so how all of these 3 children have to escape their homeland and what that's like to be a refugee during these 3 different time periods. How are they the same and how are they different? I thought this is such an important read for middle graders, especially ones who have, like me, been relatively sheltered from this type of thing in our lifetimes. Even though 2 of these stories happened during my lifetime, I still have been pretty sheltered from it. So I thought that this was a fabulous read. Well worth it to pick up. And then the last one I'm going to mention that's middle grade is called Sweep by Jonathan Auxier, the story of a girl and her monster. I recognize that I have talked about this book quite a bit. This was one of our middle grade March group reads a couple of years ago. This one takes place in Victorian London, and we follow the life of a young chimney sweep girl. And it does talk about other children and the chimney sweep and child labor and all of the things that are happening in historically at that time. This does have an element of folklore, fantastical element in it that is really lovely as well, but it is set during this Victorian London, and the child labor protests that end up going on during that time are a part of this story as well. And it's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So I definitely couldn't do a non-World War II historical fiction and not include those middle grade books. But I do have some adult reads to talk about. So let's just go through them. I do not have these really organized in any particular way other than how I could hold them up in a stack. So first we're going to talk about The Orphan Collector by Ellen Marie Wiseman. She has written quite a few that have some historical elements to them. This one, if you liked Orphan Train by Christina Baker Klein, this might be an interesting read for you because those orphan trains are an element of this story as well. But this one takes place during the Spanish flu epidemic in 1918 in the United States, in Philadelphia in particular. And we follow a young girl who is kind of stuck caring for her infant twin brothers because her mom gets sick. And then she gets separated from them right near the beginning, and we kind of follow her journey trying to get back to her brothers and find out what happened to them. There's also an evil neighbor who takes matters into her own hands and then decides there's some profit in kind of stealing children. She's despicable, this neighbor. She's despicable. Very interesting to read about, but just awful. But the story is set during the Spanish flu, and it's so interesting. The author that I'm including 2 books from is Amy Harmon, because I love her. And I just wanted to include both of these books. So What the Wind Knows by Amy Harmon is set in America, but also in Ireland. And it's set in Ireland during the time when Ireland wanted to separate from England. And so the revolution is at the very beginning, and there are some people who are becoming more and more vocal about wanting that separation, and things are a little bit dangerous. And we follow this young woman whose grandfather is from Ireland, and she loves her grandpa so much. And then her grandpa, very early on in this story, is on his deathbed and kind of has a wish for her to travel to his childhood home. It's kind of like his dying wish. And so she does so, and then there is this kind of portal back in time. So she travels back in time to 1921 when Ireland is teetering on the edge of war. So very good. There is a romance in here, but it is about like the history of Ireland wanting that revolution is definitely a part of this story as well. Love it. And then if you ever played Oregon Trail when you were younger, like I did, you need to read Where the Lost Wander by Amy Harmon. I thought this was a fabulous read, set in mid 1800s in United States as people are traveling west. And we follow this family who joins up with a caravan of covered wagons traveling west, and they experience disease and have to ford rivers and all of these things that I remember playing in Oregon Trail. I just thought that this was really fabulous. We follow Naomi, who's the daughter in this family. She is recently widowed, and then her family, the May family. But we also follow a young man named John, who is half Pawnee and half white. And so he is really struggling with his identity, really. Does he relate more with the Native American side of himself or with his white father? And just as they encounter Indigenous people along the way, how that is handled, I thought was done well from my perspective and with respect. And John's journey was just so interesting. And John and Naomi together, their journey was lovely. And I just really, really loved this book so much. It was among my favorite of the year a couple years ago. One that I just read this year that also deals with Indigenous Native Americans is Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese. This one takes place in Canada, and we follow a young boy who is Native, and he is sent to an Indian training school, I think they call them. One of those horrible schools that we've heard about in the last couple of years where there was just a lot of abuse going on. In this story, we do follow Saul Indian Horse, and it almost reads like a memoir. At the beginning, we see him as an adult, and he's writing out kind of his life story as part of therapy. And then we kind of go back as he's writing his story. We go back to his childhood and see how it is that he was with his family originally and how he ended up at one of these schools, and then how hockey became a tool that almost rescued him from despair and from the school itself. And so hockey is a big part of this, but I don't think you need to know much about hockey to appreciate how it was so impactful in Saul Indian Horse's life. But this book wrecked me a couple different times. Like, yeah, this was a heavy read. It's a short little book, but very, very impactful and so well done. So yeah, Indian Horse is a fantastic non-World War II read. Another one that was just really heavy, but also so well done, is Yellow Wife by Sadiqa Johnson. She wrote a story. Whew. This also is quite a slim little book. We follow Phoebe, who is a young biracial girl. At the beginning, promised her freedom, and when her mom, who was enslaved, and her dad, who was the plantation owner, go away on a trip, the wife of the plantation owner sells Phoebe to the owner of a jail that was here in Richmond. The jail was called Devil's Half Acre. And if that doesn't tell you about things that are going to happen in this book, I don't know what will, but it was intense and heartbreaking. And Phoebe is this young woman trying to survive and do the best that she can, as she is now forced to become the mistress of this jail owner and try to survive and help other people as best as she can, and yet has to make some really tough decisions herself. It's just awful. It was very intense and beautifully written. Yeah, definitely one that I will not forget anytime soon. Another one that I have read relatively recently is The Dove Keepers. I read it this year by Alice Hoffman. This one goes way back to kind of biblical times, ancient Israel. And there is a story that, the story of Masada. And historically, Masada is this top of a mountain, basically, or top of these cliffs in the desert in Israel. Herod, one of the Herods, built a fortress for himself there and stayed there. But at this time period of this book, I don't know, nearly 2,000 years ago, a group of kind of refugee Jewish people ran from the Romans and hid themselves up in Masada. And there were storehouses and orchards and ways to take care of themselves up there and provide for themselves. But the Romans were not thrilled about this. The Romans were conquering the whole world at that time, trying to. And so this little remnant of Jewish people who had been hiding at Masada was like a thorn in the Roman side. And they determined that they were going to figure out how to get up to these cliffs and get these people. The Romans are not able to do that. And it's historical, so I don't feel like it would be spoilers, but I wasn't aware of this story. So I feel like there's a shocking ending in here that you could Google and find out, but I feel like it's kind of more fun to just read it. But I'll just say that there are only a handful of survivors. And so this book is told from some of the survivors. We do follow 3 or 4 different women who are living at Masada and how they came to Masada, and they're dove keepers together, and how they kind of form this really strong bond between themselves. And we learn just about their stories. It was interesting to read something that happened during biblical times, but not necessarily from a biblical perspective. Yeah, that was just very interesting because it's history, not necessarily just Christian history, but Jewish history. And I really loved reading The Dove Keepers. Really loved it. I think more people should read it. I have 2 books here that are set in Afghanistan. I am just intrigued by Middle Eastern culture and history. And so I'm always kind of drawn to these kinds of books. And so I wanted to bring one that's Khaled Hosseini. He did write The Kite Runner, which is probably his more popular book, but I really loved 1,000 Splendid Suns by him as well. And in this one, we follow 2 women who are both married to the same man. And one is younger, one is older. And we just follow these women as they adjust to life, being the wives of the same husband, and what life for women is like in Afghanistan. I'm not sure what year this is written, but it does kind of say that it's during the last 30 years of Afghanistan's kind of really tumultuous history of war through the eyes of these 2 women. Now, Khaled Hosseini is not a woman himself, but I do think that the story that he wrote here is really, really beautiful. But if you're more interested in hearing an Afghan woman's story from an Afghani woman, then I would recommend Sparks Like Stars by Nadia Hashimi. I absolutely loved this book. I'm not sure I would have picked it up if one of my patrons hadn't recommended it to me. I'm so thrilled that I read this book because I did love it so much. In this one, we follow Sitara, who in the 1970s is kind of living a privileged life in her beautiful homeland of Afghanistan. Her father works for the president, and so she is friends with the president's children, but she is there when the Soviet coup happens, and her whole family is basically killed right in front of her eyes. She goes to hide in the castle in the president's house, is discovered by someone who helped her family, and is whisked away, hidden, and then helped to escape, flee from Afghanistan. Because her family was so prominent, her life is now in danger as well. So then we follow her as she lives in America, in the foster care system in America. Sometimes that is really an awful situation for her. But then she, as she gets older, always has this dream of traveling back to Afghanistan as a young woman and kind of coming face to face with some of the people who she thought were on her side and seeing her country again. And so she does. She is able to travel back to Afghanistan, but now the Taliban is in power and it's a very, very different country from what she knew as a kid. I just thought this was beautifully written and such an interesting story told through the eyes of this young woman, Sitara. Absolutely loved this book. Absolutely loved it. I have 3 more. Next up is The Gown by Jennifer Robson. I really loved this book. In this one, we're in England in 1947, so it is kind of still just at the end of World War II, or just after. Princess Elizabeth gets married, Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten. And we follow not so much the Queen, or the princess at the time, and her story, but we follow the women, some of the women who worked on embroidering the gown, and learn about the behind the scenes of creating this gown that has become kind of iconic, and just learning about life in the embroidery room, and in particular following some of the women that were involved. And I loved this. I thought it was so interesting. It was a nice glimpse. There is a 2016 storyline as well. There is a dual timeline. So we do have more of a present day timeline as well. But I loved the story of these women and their friendships that developed as they created this gown. So that was a really interesting and fun read. I gave it 5 stars. I think most of these ended up with 5 stars for me. I would be hard pressed to not include a Kristen Hanna on this list. She has a couple that are non-World War II. She has some that are World War II as well, but I really did enjoy The Four Winds, even though this is a very bleak, a very bleak story. But I think it fits so well because this takes place during the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, and migration of people from the Midwest to California during this really difficult time in American history. So we do follow Elsa. Yes, we do follow Elsa. It's the 1920s. She is a little bit older and still single, ends up getting married to a young farmer, and he leaves very early on in the story, and she kind of hasn't ever had a family that she loves, and so she stays with his parents because she loves them, and she's got a child now, and things just get more and more difficult for Elsa. It's like blow after blow. She just has to deal with a lot of stuff from her childhood, from how she is raised, to being with this new family. She gets glimpses of life and light in her life, but there are just circumstance after circumstance that make things very difficult for her. And we follow her as she has to make the tough decision to leave this land that she loves and these people that she loves and travel to California because of her child. And even in California, there are so many difficulties, and it just is, it's a heartbreaker. It's a tearjerker for sure. And it does feel very bleak. But if you just look for those pockets of light, there are people and relationships and friendships that come into Elsa's life that bring those moments of hope and light in this very bleak time. But it was a bleak time. I can't imagine being a farmer, a wheat farmer during the Dust Bowl period, and like just losing everything year after year after year, and the dust and the crop, like just, I can't imagine. And finally, I have one last one that I also just read last year, I Must Betray You by Ruta Sepetys. I love Ruta Sepetys very much. She often takes these parts of history that are not super common to write about, even if they are set in World War II. This one is not. This is set during the Cold War in Romania, where it's a communist nation, and Ceausescu and his wife are the dictators of Romania at that time, and they have created this atmosphere of distrust because they have tasked people with spying on their neighbors. And so many people have become informants for the government that you never know who to trust. Even within your own home, you don't know if it's bugged. You don't know if someone in your own home is an informant. And we follow young Christian who is 17 in high school. He's kind of has a crush on this girl, but then he is tasked. He's called after school one day to meet with the Secret Service and as requested his service to be an informant on the people in his life. And Christian also knows people who are involved in this young adult started kind of rebel group, or a group that is ready to buck the system. And so he has to really struggle. He's really struggling in his mind of what he's going to do. Is he going to betray the people that he loves and cares about and inform on them? Or is he going to join up with this group that's fighting against this government? What is he going to do? Is very intense, and that atmosphere of distrust is displayed so well in this book. You just never know who to trust. What should Christian do? His family his grandfather in particular is really wonderful. But yeah, it has some surprising moments. It just was really, really well written. I loved this one. So I hope if you are one of those people who feels like the historical fiction market is inundated with World War II, which I love World War II historical fiction. I'm not trying to knock that because I still love reading World War II, but some people do feel like it's overdone. And so here are a number of books that you could pick up some are more recent releases, some are a little older, but there are books here that you could pick up that might scratch that historical fiction itch, but not be World War II. I hope you found some that sound good to you. Let me know down below if you have added any of these to your TBR, or if you've read them and also loved them, or if you have any other non-World War II historical fiction books that you would recommend. Put them down in the comments, and then you guys can also search through the comments to see other recommendations as well. I love that kind of interaction down in the comments, and I love chatting with you in the comments, so let's talk down there. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here today, and I look forward to talking with you in another video very soon. Bye.